After my talk with Eliza, we ended up having to go back to Mr. Wallendor in order to get the information about where exactly this contact was and how we could get in touch with them ourselves. He, of course, was entirely against it and had a very strong distaste for the woman, even calling her a swindler. However, after laying out the facts that the person he had been buying magical goods from since breaking off contact with her was basically swindling him, and that the only good assets that he acquired were from that person, he changed his tune, suddenly feeling much more like a fool. It wasn't as good as him actually feeling bad, but it was a close second, and it was good enough to get the information we needed. Apparently, the magical goods had come from a woman that had been called a witch, though in the list of spellcasting, I'm not really sure where witch would fall in. There didn't seem to be any specifics in the magical index about witches in particular, or whether they were an individual spellcaster category. I think more or less it's just a term that is often used when talking about female spellcasters. Regardless, we acquired the information, and me, Eliza, and Alice set off on a carriage ride there. Unfortunately, this was looking like it was going to be a long one. On the way, Eliza discussed many of the details of her research, primarily the incoherent nature in which they described magical products in the book that she was given. She seemed highly dissatisfied with it, saying that more or less it was nothing more than a cookbook, containing recipes for things, but not actually explaining any of the complex things that make it work and why those ingredients fulfill their function within the product that they're creating. This, of course, was unacceptable to Eliza, so of course she had to test everything to the absolute extent. It wasn't a matter of knowing a recipe. She needed to know what everything did in great detail. After examining the magical goods that were of actual good quality, she found an interesting bunch of information on the topic. Primarily, that it seemed that the different magical goods seemed to fulfill different types of functions and have different effects on magical energy. As I said before, the different magical energies that exist in the world are basically boundless, existing in every type and variety you can possibly think of, from everything from your emotional state to spiritual, mental, physical, and even natural energies. And the different magical products that we obtained had different effects on those energies. For example, Eliza was able to discover that one of the items with an extremely high price tag, the black cat hair, actually served as a powerful magnetic force for negative energy. Basically, the energy produced by negative things, such as negative emotions like anger, rage, sadness, sorrow, acting like a magnet and drawing them in, focusing them, and holding an extremely high amount of them before it starts to break down. And many of the other substances which she tested and studied had similar effects that differed depending on the product. Some would act like barriers, rejecting all kinds of energy. Others, like conduits, transmitting the energy from one place to another, allowing the energy to safely pass through, but only specific types. Quite frankly, Eliza found the entire thing fascinating, and wanted to do more scientific study and research. Quite frankly, one thing that she was most intrigued about was what it was that actually caused these effects. In other words, what made these things special? How exactly did the events and circumstances leading to the creation of these magical products produce the result? And thus, how best to use the resulting effects to produce something as effectively as possible. As Eliza was drolling on, which was typical whenever she talked about something that she found interesting, normally I might have to calm her down, tell her to go easier on the details. But quite frankly, I was going into a business deal, and I needed every bit of information on the topic that I could get. Not knowing what you're dealing with is an obvious disadvantage when you're trying to cut a bargain, and I needed to eliminate as much of that as possible. Regardless, we were well on our way to meeting our contact. It wouldn't be long now before we arrived, and as I sat in the carriage waiting, trying to puzzle over the different aspects that I'd need to talk about, a thought occurred to me, being how it was that someone who possessed Forever Fortunate was able to be swindled in the first place. It seemed like Forever Fortunate would block off things like that. I looked over to Alice, who, at the time, was playing with a doll that she had brought along. Something of a makeshift voodoo doll that she had put together herself, and was happily jabbing pins into in all different directions. Hey Alice, I asked, as she looked up at me from playing with her doll. There's something that's bothering me. How exactly is it that your father was able to get swindled when he has Forever Fortunate? It just sort of feels like that shouldn't be possible. Oh no, it's very possible, Alice replied. You see, Forever Fortunate isn't a fix for everything. I thought I explained this already, but I suppose I didn't cover these details. Normally I'd keep little weaknesses like this a secret, but since it's you, Reginald, you get to know. After all, you'll need to factor it into your master plan. Right? She said, smiling at me, holding up her little voodoo doll and giving it a shake. Yeah, I suppose it would be helpful to have as much information as possible, I replied. Okay, Reginald, so it works like this. Forever Fortunate basically eliminates the negative options, right? Allowing you to be fortunate in the things that you do. But you have to remember that people and objects and events are different and work in different ways, Alice said, putting the little voodoo doll back into her lap and poking it with another needle. To be honest, it was probably the effect of Forever Fortunate that allowed him to make contact with this dealer in the first place. And my dad just messed it up. You see, people aren't like objects or events. People have their own wills, ideas, thoughts, and emotions that all gum up the works. They're simply too complex for an increase in fortune to contradict or overwhelm. So while Forever Fortunate might be able to help you get in contact with people that might bring you good fortune or good interactions, it's still up to you to maintain that relationship. Forever Fortunate won't stop you from making a fool of yourself and ruining good relationships. And as far as my father getting swindled, I wouldn't say it's completely true. After all of the magical goods he got from other vendors did still have some manner of magical essence to them. It was just much, much weaker than the initial dealer he was working with. If I had to place a guess on it, I'd say that the power of Forever Fortunate brought him to the right dealer in the first place. The best option that he could have found. However, my father's temperament messed that up. And so Forever Fortunate simply did the best that it could with what it had, and eventually led my father to the next best thing. Basically, the best option that he could attain, without the one that he had already messed up. Which, quite frankly, doesn't speak very well of our fortunes if we're unable to sway her and get her to start selling us her goods. If that's the case, then all we'll have left is, well, those lackluster products that Eliza was talking about. It probably wouldn't be that bad if we were accepted in the magical communities. We'd most likely have access to more dealers who weren't so, well, crooked. But as I said, people aren't like objects or events. You can't control them with Forever Fortunate. And if someone refuses to deal with you because you don't have status, an increase in fortune might help with dealing with them somewhat, but it's not a guarantee that you're not going to mess it up.